What's up, everybody? Before we get started, I want to thank you all for supporting Rippaverse's first ever crowdfund. If you don't know what this is, we want to launch officially the animated universe for the Rippaverse, but we need your help, of course, to make this happen. You can back for as low as $5, so go to rippaverse.com or ripperworks.com and go check that out if you want to see more animations like this one right here. All right. Let's talk about this whole Netflix thing, WB, everything that's happening, this acquisition. I don't think people understand the severity of the situation, truly. You've heard it, obviously, from other accounts where some have said this is disastrous for the industry. And, it's for different reasons, though. But I want people to understand why Netflix is really in the best position right now. They don't have to necessarily budge or make an adjustment, like, let's say, prioritizing theatrical releases or anything like that. They truly, honestly, don't have an incentive to do that. Pull some data. I just want to, again, contextualize this and everything that's going on. Okay. So in 2024, Netflix's revenue was almost $40 billion, and that's almost entirely from streaming. Okay. They had a profit, and this is the important part, of $10 billion in net income. Now, you have heard me discuss this before, where streaming services have not been that big profitable, like, sort of thing for a lot of these major studios. None of them are consistently in the black, maybe for a quarter or something of that nature, but for the most part, they're all losing money on streaming services. They have not quite figured out the economics of it all. Netflix being the first in and the best dressed, they already have that stuff figured out. Everybody else is trying to catch up with Netflix, so they understand, like, we've moved towards this digital world, and a lot of people want convenience and prefer that type of convenience. But the economic model to making that a profitable venture is still yet to be determined for a lot of these companies. Okay, now let's talk about the first half of 2025 real quick. They're operating Netflix's streaming operating income right now is about $7.1 billion for the first half of 2025. Putting this in context, combined for all of their streaming services, Disney is only at $682 million. Warner Bros. Losing money, $21 million. Comcast is losing money with $316 million. Okay, that's Peacock services, by the way. So now, as we mentioned, almost $40 billion in revenue last year. The numbers really start to scream at you when you look at that comparative to the other major studios, right? So Warner Bros. Discovery, they have about the same as far as their total revenue is concerned. That's about what they're bringing in, similar to Netflix, around almost $40 billion, okay? The problem with that is that's including everything for Warner Bros. So TV, cable, studios, the streaming stuff, all of that. And just on streaming alone, Netflix is comparable, okay? Disney, about $91.4 billion, so a little over half, right? But again, that's including theme parks, the cruises, all the other merchandise, all the other stuff that Disney does really, really well on and getting that return. Comcast is obviously massive with over almost $124 billion. Again, considering the game that Comcast is playing, like with the net communications and the telecommunications, broadband, cable, all of that good stuff, they're making money elsewhere. It's not the streaming services that's bringing in the dough. But man, when you compare these theatrical releases, the theatrical box office with those companies individually, you see just how Netflix is, like, not just beating them, they're destroying them. Warner Bros. Pulled in $11.6 billion in revenue in 2024 with their theatrical releases. Okay, that's dropped year to year, by the way. You look at NBC Universal. Okay, $3.76 billion global box office. That's Universal, Illumination, DreamWorks, all of that. Paramount, $1.1 billion in quarter four 2024. With nearly $900 million global box office for 2024. Guys, Netflix won. They're beating them if you are talking streaming versus theatrical releases. And this is the part that I think a lot of people had a great discussion on Flashcast the other day. We kind of talked a lot about this. There's a lot of people that do not want to face the reality that we do not live in the same world that we lived in before. The companies don't want to face that reality. A lot of the fans don't want to face that reality. And it's something that it's hitting everybody all at once. how bad things are. And I'm not saying that I like the direction that it's trended towards, right? I'm a guy that prioritizes, for example, physical copies with our comic books, with our company. So it's not to say that I like the direction that it's going in. I'm just telling you the direction that it has went. You now have an entire generation, for example, that is being raised where their number one thing and go-to form of entertainment is not going to the movies, okay? And when they do go see movies, they're not going to see them in theaters. That really did these folks in. There's a couple of things that with definitely with Hollywood that they just had working against them. I've talked about how social media killed the movie star, but a big thing is how they kind of slid behind some of the other entertainment industries, namely gaming. People realize, youngsters especially, that gaming, they can get the same sort of experience with the story and they can interact with it, right? So TV and film is no longer the go-to thing that people do. But as far as the theatrical releases, like box offices, when I talked about people that not being the thing that they did, we were the last generation. I saw younger millennials were the last generation really of people that when we were young, that's what we did. That was a thing that people did on a Saturday, on a Friday, on a weekend, whatever. Even if you didn't know, you had your movies that you maybe look forward to going to see, but even if you didn't know what was being shown at the cinema, you went there just to kind of hang out. And then by the time you got there, you decided what you all were going to watch. That is not the experience of a lot of people anymore. Okay. That's just not. That is not the reality. And this is why this is the hard pill to swallow for these people is that it doesn't really matter how good they make these films. Okay. Even when you look at the ones that are good, they're blips. You could see like, oh, Zootopia or whatever, and they can only seem to make this money like that anyway, have those major box office returns. They only seem to have that on properties that have been around for a little bit. But even when you look at something like that, it's a blip because then you start looking at the data and you see, like, for example, in October, that was the worst October in like 24 years, 25 years, I believe, quarter century for their box office. And it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And that's just if the really big benefit that they have right now is that inflation is so bad because it allows them to boost the numbers. So it looks sort of comparative. But when you talk about general ticket sales, right? Because even $500 million is nothing what it was 5 years ago. So when you look at individual ticket sales or you're trying to do the math there, you see it's just not as many people going to the cinema. And I think for these theaters, what they're having to figure out is creative ways to make this something worthwhile for people. And I think it is going to be more of an experience that they have to sell, a little more artisan. That's fine. On the Hollywood side, they got to get the budgets under control. They can't be spending all of this money, which kind of works against what they want because they're the only studios, these major studios are the only ones that can afford to pay them like they have been paying them. It is a disaster for these guys. This is much worse than what people I think are even discussing this as far as the industry because it's so telling. Like the new dog, the new gig in town should have been Blockbuster. Blockbuster was too silly to be the guys that went in on this type of service. So Netflix comes in, and in 20 years, now they're on top of the industry. It happens quick. But it's worse. It's worse than what I think a lot of people are talking about. I do believe there's money to be made doing film and TV. I do believe, though, however, y'all got to get y'all's budgets under control, and you got to get over this idea that you're gonna have to make a half of $1 billion in order to have box office success. I guess you technically have to do that when you're spending 250 million, but if you can get those budgets under control, get rid of all the red tape, you can at least get profitable ventures. But I think the days of just these crazy big massive box offices, those are behind us, and it'll never be recaptured because the culture has fundamentally changed. Okay, and how people consume media has fundamentally changed. It is not the same at all, and there's no amount of good stuff we can talk about wokeness and all these other things that work against them. Make no mistake. But even if they reverse that, just the way the culture is set up right now, there is no return to form. They may do okay for themselves, but as far as getting to what it was before, that'll never happen again just because we're living in a different world. Bottom line.